Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our read-along of Anthony Trollope's novel, The American Senator. This is part of our ongoing effort to read Trollope novels that are not in the two long sequences of novels that on which hangs most of his fame. We are instead spending all of 2020 consorting with Lonely Trollops, the standalone novels that are well worth your time, even though they are not quite as famous. And this novel follows in a thread that Trollope had been writing. Several of his recent novels around this time were pulling at the same thread of outsiders, of England viewed from the outside. And in this case, it's by the eponymous American senator, Senator Gotobed from Mickewa, who comes from America as a guest of a host in England and studies the ways of the English. And he is annoying in his inquisitiveness, and he's annoying in his obdurate foreignness. He is constantly making speechifying little pronouncements about how things just aren't like this in my home country. He gets tiresome very fast. I think that was very intentional. And the great drama that he observes is the English aristocratic set in the country house setting where they usually spend a lot of their time, and where Trollope is the great chronicler. And the Senator Gotobed part is one part of this book. As Senator Gotobed studies English law and custom, he starts, in the chapters that we're reading today, he starts to take upon himself the part of an unworthy person, a poor and unscrupulous man who is involved in a protracted contention with an aristocrat, Lord Rufford, about the game on his land and about the crops and whatnot. It's all very guided by custom and by tradition. Senator Gotobed is never going to understand it, and he is blind to that fact and bullheaded to get to the bottom of what he considers to be simple American justice being done in this case. So that is a long plot line that unspools throughout the chapters that we're reading today, and it involves him backing one side against another, and you know right away that he has no idea what he's doing. You know right away that he isn't aware of any of the antecedents involved. He just wants to. I think there's a good case to be made that he wants to parade his own morality. But one way or another, that is one theme that runs throughout the bulk of the chapters that we're reading today. And another theme that runs throughout is something that we touched on before, because there's another main character in this book. Senator Gotobed is a main character in a very shallow way, as contemporary critics pointed out when this book came out in 1877. Critics pointed out that the guy whose name is the title of the book is a cipher. He's not interesting at all. He's meant only to provide exposition and hectoring. Whereas the other main character, Arabella Trefoil, is utterly fascinating. She is completely three-dimensional. She's just not savory. And she is not a focal point of satire at all on a social level. She's a focal point of enormous satire or rather not on a political level. She's a focal point for satire on a social level, because she is one of these characters that we meet often in Trollope. She is a young woman who's not quite as young as she used to be and needs to marry well. She has no money. She and her mother have virtually no fixed abode and virtually no money. The task of her entire life has been to marry well. And to that end, she has mortgaged every bit of money or morality that she has. Trollope does not like her. He admires her, at least, because she is courageous, because she is willing to stick everything on getting what she wants, rather than settling down or doing something, making some accommodation with the rude hand that fate has dealt her. She is the niece of a duke, but she has nothing of her own, virtually nothing of her own. And as a horrible mixture with having nothing of her own, she has ambitions to have everything. And she meets Lord Rufford and decides, the narrative tells us that he is not a marrying man, and Trollope elaborates in the chapters that we're reading today that what that means is he's going to put off marrying until he has to sire an heir, at which point he will marry a member of his own class who he doesn't care about at all, and he will do that. He will sire an heir, and that'll be that. But that until that time comes, he's not going to bother with it. He's certainly not going to marry out of love, because the clear implication is that neither he nor Arabella Trefoil can feel love. Trollope explicitly says it about her, and he pretty much implies it about Lord Rufford. Nevertheless, when she sees Rufford Hall, his country estate, She realizes she has a what I can't help but think is an intentional parody of the moment in Pride and Prejudice when Lizzie Bennet sees Pemberley and sort of wistfully yearns to be the mistress. Wouldn't it be an amazing thing to be the mistress of all this? Arabella Trefoil has a smaller version of that moment where she says, the sight of the hangings of the room, so different from the old-fashioned dingy curtains at Bragton, the brilliancy of the mirrors, all the decorations of the place, the very blaze from the big grate, forced upon the girl's feelings a conviction that this was her proper sphere. Here she was, being made much of, a newcomer, and here, if possible, she must remain. Everything smiled on her with gilded dimples, and these were the smiles she valued. As the softness of the cushions sank into her heart, and the mellow nothingness from well-trained voices greeted her ears, and the air of wealth and idleness floated about her cheeks, her imagination rose within her and assured her that she could secure something better than Bragton. The caution with which she had armed herself faded away. This was the kind of thing for which she had been striving. The kind of thing is very much meant to be emphasized there. It's not Rufford himself. She doesn't care about that. She's seen that this could be the thing she wants. And the chapters that we're reading today have lots of other things that happen. Senator Gotobed pursues his little legal inquiry against what he perceives as an unjust custom. And we also have a couple of fox hunting scenes. Naturally, it's a Trollope novel, so, and look, there's the cover right there. There's a fox hunting scene in which a character is fatally thrown. He is insensate for a long time. It takes a long time to die, but it's a very brutal moment. It's a very brutal scene. We see this character, Canebrake, right before he has his fatal fall on his horse. And we can see in that moment that his doom is coming upon him because he is white-faced with fury and his horse is bleeding all over from his spurs. So obviously, during the course of the hunt, he has been fighting with his mount and is now asking it to take a high ditch, which is not going to work, and it doesn't work. The horse falls and rolls over him. And it's a brutal moment, and it underscores, everybody thinks of Trollope as the fox hunting novelist. Thanks to Henry James, everybody thinks of him as the fox hunting novelist, and his fox hunting scenes are wonderful. There have been collections of Trollope's fox hunting scenes. They were by this point expected in a Trollope novel. But in this book, we're reminded that Trollope was well aware of how brutal the practice was, not only for men and horses, but for everything else. We're told in a later scene, after Canebrake has died, we're told Lord Rufford writes a letter to Arabella Trefoil and briefly describes a hunt that he had just been on, where one person fell and broke his collarbone, another's horse had to be destroyed, a couple of dogs had to be left on the field because they were just too knackered to make it back home. He describes a bloody, brutal mess of a practice, and he describes it in thoughtlessly approving terms. And because Arabella Trefoil wants to graft herself onto him in his world, she naturally takes it up too. But the main way that she grafts onto his world is the old-fashioned way. She tries to trap him into an implied promise of union, so that she can then besmirch his honor and threaten him with social ostracization if he doesn't marry her. It's essentially coercion. And he almost falls for it. They meet up at a country house called Mistletoe. She badgers him into being there when she's there, and she is there on the sufferance of her uncle and his wife, who, once they notice the kind of maneuverings that are going on under their roof, make a mental resolve never to invite her mother back. So in that moment at Mistletoe, everything depends on the throw of the dice. Arabella Trefoil knows on one level how thin the ice is with her aunt and uncle. And she also knows how tentative her grasp is on Lord Rufford. The whole thing requires nerve. And she views that the prize at the end of it, being the mistress of Rufford Hall, is worth it. And so she does. And quite by coincidence here, I'm breaking this thing up into 20 chapters at a time, and just by coincidence, the block of chapters that we're reading today happens to end right as that Mistletoe encounter is ending, and it ends brutally for Arabella because he sneaks out before dawn. He sneaks out before he was going to be forced to have a conversation with her uncle or with her father about marrying her. He escapes from Mistletoe. But even so, even then, when everyone who's in the know knows that he is fleeing from her, and where now no one believes her claims that he did propose to her before. No one believes any of that now. They believe she's just an adventuress. She's just trying to nail a wealthy husband. Even though all of that is true, at the end of the chapters that we're reading today, she has not given up hope. And that's where we leave things for today. So I'm dying to know what you make of all this. Those of you who are reading this for the first time, you're dunked in here. I'm assuming that there's a love story. Of course, there's a love story to Clueless Young People. I don't mention it because it's one of the lightest love stories Trollope ever did. I don't believe that any of you are finding it satisfying. But I'd love to hear if you are. But mainly, I'd love to hear the balance between those two things. I'm assuming that by this point in the novel, you are well and truly fed up with Senator Gotobed and would rather just concentrate on Arabella Trefoil. But maybe not. So I want to hear all about it. And we will end there, and we will move on to, let's see here. Let's go to the chapter listing here. I never have a bookmark in. We're going to go on to the chapter called Again at Mistletoe. So we'll have a bunch of chapters where a bunch of things happen, but then the characters return to the scene of the crime. They return there. That's where we'll go for next week. So we're going to continue with the American Senator for next week, all the way to that chapter. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now, but I'd love to hear what you're making of all this if you're reading this Lonely Trollope for the first time. But anyway, in the meantime, I'm gonna wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.